at last," he said, turning the heavy door latch with a metallic click that echoed through the empty gym. "It is just the two of us now." Travis Benton's voice carried as if that were something Rachel Moore should feel fortunate about, but her hand froze the moment it wrapped around her water bottle. The weight rack in front of her suddenly felt impossibly far away, as though she would need to cross an entire mile to reach it, even though it was only a few steps ahead. She had worked out here this late dozens of times before, yet never had Travis looked at her like that. Never had he stood blocking the entrance with a smile that never touched his eyes. Summer in Austin had settled into a suffocating heat, and the fluorescent lights cast a cold, sharp glow over the concrete floor. Rachel blinked, her sweat not yet dry from her workout, but the dampness now running down her spine had nothing to do with exercise. Travis stepped closer, and his gaze no longer held the friendly guidance of a trainer, but carried instead the forced warmth of someone determined to take what he believed was owed. Rachel tried to keep her voice steady. "Travis, I think I should go home." She lifted her wrist toward her watch, just an excuse, but the motion revealed the thin silver ring on her fourth finger, a sign he should have respected. Yet Travis did not step back. "You ignored my messages, Rachel. 3 weeks now. You cannot pretend nothing happened after that night." She swallowed, feeling her heartbeat pounding hard enough to fill her ears. "Nothing happened," she said, still trying to hold her ground. "You kissed me, I pushed you away, and I said no. That is all." He laughed, but the sound carried no joy, only something slick and unpleasant that made her skin prickle. "That is not how I remember it. You laughed. You wore those charcoal leggings I like. You wanted it." Her fingers tightened around the water bottle as if it were the last weapon she had. She was 28. She worked in marketing for a software company. She had stood on stages in front of hundreds of people presenting products, argued with major partners across conference tables. Yet now, facing Travis in a locked, empty gym, she felt like a 17-year-old girl again. Small, fragile, easily broken. "I have a boyfriend," she said, lifting her hand so the light could catch the ring. Ethan was a lawyer, 6 years older than she was, and they had lived together for 4 years. He was traveling for work, as he often did, so often that Rachel sometimes forgot what it felt like to have someone beside her. Travis only curled his lip. "You are not happy. I have seen it for the past 6 months. Every time you walk in here, exhausted, pressured, quiet. But when you train with me, you are different. You smile. You live. That does not mean anything. You are my trainer, and that is all. Open the door, Travis." She stepped back, but he moved forward. The distance between them shrank to a few short strides. She could smell the mix of sweat and the cheap cologne he used. The air seemed to thicken. "Not until you tell the truth. Not until you admit how you feel." A sudden sound broke from the far corner of the gym, from the personal training room Rachel had always thought was closed at this hour. She flinched. Travis spun around, his posture abruptly defensive. "What was that?" "I booked this whole floor. No one is supposed to be here." Rachel looked past him and felt her whole body lock in place. A man had just stepped out of that room, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal gray suit tailored to an unforgiving precision. His dark hair was slicked back, his face carved with the hard lines of cold stone, angular and unyielding. But it was his eyes that stole her breath, storm cloud gray, fixed on Travis with a chill sharper than ice. "I reserved this space," he said, his voice low, not loud, yet carrying a weight that seemed to drop the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Travis squared his shoulders, trying to gather whatever authority he thought he had. "Look, I am a senior trainer here. I have access. You locked the door." The statement held no question. The stranger took one step forward. Rachel realized 2 things at once. 1, the way he moved was smooth, but carried the unmistakable imprint of combat training. 2, Travis was backing away, as if suddenly recognizing that the prey had become the predator. "We were just talking privately," Travis stammered. The gray eyes shifted to Rachel, and she felt as though they looked through her, not at her. Instead of fear, she felt safety, something she knew she should have felt with Ethan instead. She wanted to shout, but the voice that emerged was gentle. "Is that true, that the 2 of you were speaking privately?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Marcus began. "No," but she repeated it with more force. "No. I asked him to unlock the door. He refused. The room fell silent. The fan seemed to stop. The background noise disappeared. Only the heavy quiet remained, along with the frost in the stranger's gaze. "Open the door," he said, soft as a breeze, yet strong enough to make Travis tremble. "If you are still listening at this point, then perhaps this story has touched something inside you, whether it is anger, worry, or simply a sense of quiet empathy. If it has, please remember to subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who may need to hear a story like this. We tell pieces of life, the small moments that seem ordinary yet hold the power to change a person. Where are you listening from? Leave a comment with the name of your city or state. We always want to know how far these stories travel and who is on the other side of the screen, listening in silence." Travis stood frozen for a few seconds, his eyes darting back and forth between Rachel and the man who was moving toward them. His face flushed red, but it was no longer the familiar flare of anger, it was fear. "You cannot do this, Rachel," he stammered, as if still trying to cling to the last scrap of control. "We just need to talk, that is all." But Rachel did not answer. Her gaze was fixed on the stranger who had just appeared, and she felt as if the world had tilted slightly the moment he walked into it. He did not raise his voice, he did not threaten, and yet the entire room seemed to shrink around him. Travis, who had always been the one to dominate every situation, now stood like a schoolboy caught misbehaving in front of the principal. "I told you to open the door," the man repeated, his voice even, no louder than before, but cold enough to cut through bone. Travis glanced toward the door, then looked back and forced an awkward smile. "Who are you anyway? You do not have the right to order me around." But his hands were already trembling. Rachel could see it clearly as he reached for the panel beside the door and entered the code to unlock it. A sharp beep sounded, followed by the click of the bolt releasing. Light from the hallway spilled in, softening the suffocating tension that had filled the gym. Travis turned to leave, but the man's voice came again. "Your phone. Unlock it and give it to me." "What? No way. That is private. The man did not move. He simply pulled his own phone from the inside pocket of his suit, unlocked it, and held the screen up to Travis. Rachel could not see what was on it, but the moment Travis's eyes landed on the screen, he went pale. "I am looking at your employment contract with this gym chain and the other 3 branches across the city. I see your apartment lease. I see the loan for that black sports car of yours. Your entire life is in here. You have 2 choices. 1, you give me your phone, or 2, I make a call, and by tomorrow morning, all of it disappears. Do you understand?" Travis did not answer right away. He stood there, white as chalk, his jaw clenched tight. Rachel had never seen anyone look as though they might vomit in the middle of a gym. At last, Travis pulled his phone from his pocket, hesitated, entered his passcode with shaking fingers, and handed it to the man. For the next few minutes, the only sound was the faint swipe of a fingertip across a screen. Rachel felt her throat tighten as the man read each message aloud. "You cannot avoid me forever, Rachel. I know where you live. Your husband does not deserve you. Stop pretending. You are teasing me. Just admit what you want. 37 messages. You did not answer a single one." The man lifted his head, his eyes cold as he looked at Travis. "Which part of that made you think she wanted to be locked in a room with you?" Travis opened his mouth, but no words came. "I did not think. You thought you could force a woman half your size with strength and pressure to get what you wanted." The man raised the phone. "I am keeping this. You are going to leave this building right now, drive home, and tomorrow morning, you will resign from every place you work. You will tell them you are moving to another city for personal reasons, and you will never contact Rachel again. No messages, no calls, no social media. If I hear otherwise, I will not only end your career. Do you understand? You cannot just take my phone. That is a violation of my privacy." The man stepped closer, lowered his head, and whispered something into Travis's ear that Rachel could not hear. But the effect was unmistakable. Travis jerked back as if slapped. He turned, stumbled toward the doorway, nearly tripping as he crossed the threshold, and disappeared into the hallway. His hurried footsteps echoed down the emergency stairwell until they faded into silence. Rachel realized she was still gripping the edge of the weight bench beside her. She let go, her fingers pale from tension. The man turned back to her. Now that she faced him directly, She noticed his face was not only cold, it was seasoned. Beneath the sharp line of his jaw were faint scars, enough to understand he was no stranger to violence. But those storm-gray eyes, when they landed on her, were different. No longer icy, but filled with a controlled concern. "Are you all right?" The question was gentle, as if he were asking whether she needed more water, but it made her chest crack open. She nodded, unsure whether her voice would come out steady. "Did he hurt you before tonight? I mean, he kissed me 3 weeks ago after a workout. I pushed him away, said no, but he did not stop. Then he started texting, following me to the coffee shop I go to. Tonight was the first time I came back here since then, and I chose a late hour, thinking no one else would be around." The words were not a question, but she nodded anyway. He gave a small nod in return, as though the last missing pieces had finally settled into place. Then he walked to the door, opened it fully, and looked at her. "You should go home. Your car is in the basement garage." She nodded, but there was still a question hanging in the air. "Who are you? Why did you help me? And how did you make Travis look like he was about to pass out with just a few sentences?" He paused, then turned back to her. "I will walk you down. We will make sure he is really gone." She picked up her gym bag, her hand still unsteady, but her legs beginning to move, and as she stepped past him, she found herself whispering, "Thank you. I do not know what would have happened if you had not been there." His eyes darkened. "Nothing good," he said. And Rachel believed that more than anything else in the world. Rachel drove home in silence. The streetlights slid past her windows like blurred streaks of pale gold, flickering and vanishing again. Inside her silver Honda, there was nothing but the steady hum of the air conditioner and the unsteady rhythm of her heartbeat. She had lived through something tonight that her mind had not yet caught up to. Travis had locked the door, cornered her with no way out, spoken words that made her skin crawl. And then that man had stepped out, as if he did not belong to this world, as if he had been built for the singular purpose of arriving at the exact moment, in the exact place where she needed someone. Colin. She did not know his name, but her mind had already given him one, as if her subconscious had decided before her logic could intervene. The way he handled Travis was nothing like what a normal person would do. Not violence, but a heaviness in his stillness, the information in his phone, the quiet sentences that turned Travis, the man who had terrified her, into a child caught doing something shameful. Colin did not need to raise his voice. He did not need to intimidate. One glance, one sentence, and the whole room had shifted toward him. When her car turned into the parking lot behind her apartment complex, Rachel still had not relaxed her grip on the steering wheel. She sat there for several minutes after switching off the engine, staring into the dark as if waiting for something to reveal itself. In her mind, every moment replayed, the click of the locking door, the look in Travis's eyes when he was exposed, the deep calm in Colin's voice when he said to open the door. Everything felt both real and dreamlike. She entered through the back door of the building, her third-floor apartment silent. Ethan was still gone. Of course he was. He was in Denver for a 3-day conference. The apartment was dark, without the smell of food, without a human sound. Rachel did not turn on the hallway light, relying only on memory to guide her steps. Everything was familiar, yet tonight every corner felt filled with a new kind of quiet, an emptiness she had not realized she had been living in for so long. She stepped into the bedroom, slipped off her shoes, dropped her gym bag onto the floor. The same room, the same queen bed, with the gray bedding Ethan had chosen, because it looked professional, the same wedding photo on the nightstand that neither of them had looked at in months. Rachel poured herself a glass of water and drank it quickly, as if it might wash away the tightness clinging to her chest. But it did not. Her throat stayed dry, her chest stayed heavy. She sat on the bed and turned on the lamp. The light was soft, yet the mirror reflected her pale face back at her. Her eyes were still wide, echoing a fear that had stepped back but not disappeared. She had already prepared herself to switch to another gym. She had planned to stay silent, endure, avoid like she always did. No one needed to know. She did not want trouble, did not want complications. Ethan would not understand anyway. He was always busy, always considered things like this trivial inconveniences. But Colin was different. He had not asked whether she needed help. He had simply looked, understood, and acted, not with force, but with certainty, not invading her, but protecting her. A part of her felt a tremor of fear. A man who could find every detail about someone else in seconds. An employment contract, a car loan, a lease. That did not happen by chance. That was power, control rooted in a world she did not know. And yet that same force had made Travis disappear, had brought her home safely, had kept this room, at least tonight, from becoming the place where she would have sat alone, shaking, trying to swallow her panic. Rachel lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. She did not cry. She did not shake. But inside her, her emotions churned like a lake disturbed by something deep beneath the surface. Not fear now, but something else. The same question looped in her mind like a melody that refused to end. Who is Colin? And why was he there at the single moment she needed someone most? The next morning, Rachel woke earlier than usual. The air was still dim with dawn, the light outside her window barely seeping into the bedroom. She did not remember when she had fallen asleep, only that the questions had circled her mind until her eyes grew heavy. Who was Colin? What did he do? Why had he been there at just the right moment, armed with the kind of knowledge and authority that had silenced Travis completely? She sat up, her feet touching the cold floor, and reached for her phone on the nightstand. No messages from Ethan, nothing unusual from friends or coworkers. But one message stood alone at the top of her inbox. No name, only an unfamiliar number. If you need to talk, or need anything at all, call me. Colin. Rachel stared at the words for a long moment. He knew her name. Of course he did, Travis had said it. But what unsettled her was how he wrote, without pressure, without intrusion, simply an offer, quiet and steady, as if he understood that after everything, what she needed most was the right to choose. She hesitated for a few minutes, her phone in her hand, her pulse quickening. Then, without knowing why, she pressed the call button. Each ring sounded like it stretched into a full minute. When the line connected, his voice came through, deep and clear. Rachel. She paused a second, then answered softly. I am not sure why I called. He said nothing, waiting. I wanted to thank you. For last night. I do not think I ever actually said thank you the right way. He gave a quiet laugh, barely there but real. You did. But hearing it again is not bad. Rachel pressed her lips together, her eyes drifting toward the window. I also wonder who you are. I mean, who you really are. Because clearly, you are not just someone who happened to be in a late-night training room by accident. He was silent for a moment, as if choosing his words. My name is Colin Devereaux. I work in investment and security. The job is particular. You could think of me as someone who handles problems for people who cannot protect themselves, when the law is too slow or too faint to matter. Rachel blinked. It was an answer that was both honest and yet revealed nothing at all, and Rachel found herself asking softly, So you were watching Travis? Not exactly, he replied, but I was hired to observe several individuals connected to a business chain showing irregular activity, and Travis happened to fall into that list, while you were simply caught in the middle, something that should never have happened. I do not know whether to feel lucky or frightened, she whispered. He was silent again. Perhaps both are true. But last night, when I saw him lock the door, I was no longer observing. That was a personal decision. Rachel pulled her legs up onto the chair, resting her chin on her knees. I was so scared, she said. I know, he answered, but I do not understand why you cared that much. He inhaled, the sound of his breath traveling faintly through the speaker. Because of your eyes in that moment, because I saw that look in my own reflection many years ago, and I could not stand still and watch it happen again. The words tightened her throat. She did not know what Colin had endured in the past, but she knew enough to recognize the truth in his voice. She did not ask for more. She did not need to. Thank you, Colin. Again. Truly. His voice dropped lower. If you need anything, even if it is just someone to listen, call me. She nodded, though he could not see it. I will. She ended the call and sat with the phone in her palm, her heartbeat slowly returning to a steadier rhythm after each exchanged word. It was not because Colin was handsome or powerful or because he had stepped out of the shadows like an action film hero. It was because he had seen her, truly seen her. And after so many months of living in the blurry emptiness of a fading relationship, that alone moved her in a way she struggled to name. Ethan returned late the next afternoon. the sound of suitcase wheels scraping the floor preceding him, along with the familiar, expensive cologne Rachel had once loved but now felt strangely distant from. She was slicing carrots in the kitchen when she heard the door open. He walked in the same way he always did, without warning, without a hug, offering only the same habitual sentence that no longer meant anything. "I am back." She smiled politely, more like a homeowner greeting a visitor than a partner welcoming her companion, asking if he was tired, how the trip went, whether everything was fine. Ethan answered with short phrases, his eyes fixed on his phone, as he responded to messages from someone Rachel no longer felt the need to identify. She did not tell him what had happened at the gym, not because she feared his reaction, but because she knew he would not truly hear her, or if he did listen, he would place everything on the scales of logic, analyzing it like a professional case. "Are you all right? Do you want me to call the manager? Do you have evidence?" And in the end, all emotion would be smothered under numbers and rational barricades, the tools Ethan always used to shield himself from anything he could not control. They ate dinner in silence. She cooked the pasta he liked, still remembering to add extra parmesan as usual, but he ate only half before saying he had already eaten at the airport. Rachel nodded, asking nothing more. After 4 years of living together, she had learned not to ask, not to expect more than the small crumbs of attention he offered whenever he was not preoccupied. When he stepped into his office and closed the door, she remained seated alone at the dining table, the warm overhead light casting her shadow long across the wooden surface. She suddenly remembered Colin's voice from that morning, calm and sincere, not trying to sound caring, yet somehow making her feel heard for the first time in a long while. She unlocked her phone, scrolling back to his single message. "If you need to talk, or need anything at all, call me." She did not reply, but she did not delete it either. That night, Rachel lay alone in bed. Ethan was still in his office, the glow from beneath the door stretching across the floor. The tapping of the keyboard sounded steady, broken occasionally by calls full of work talk she neither understood nor wished to understand. They had once loved each other, once spent weekends by the Galveston shore, watched movies together under blankets, argued over small things, only to reconcile with hurried kitchen kisses. But all of it had drifted away like a memory that no longer belonged to the present. Ethan had not done anything wrong. He had not betrayed her, not hurt her, not even intentionally withdrawn. He simply was no longer here. His body remained, but his mind had long since traveled elsewhere. She had once told herself that everyone changed, that work could drain a person, that love did not always look the way it had at the beginning, but time did not heal everything as she had believed. It only stretched the silence until nothing remained to hold on to except habit. The next morning, when Rachel woke, Ethan had already left for work. He had left a sticky note on the bathroom mirror. "I have a meeting at 8, lunch with partners. Do not forget the water and electric bills are due on Friday." No affectionate words, no mention that she seemed exhausted, no asking why she had barely spoken the night before. Rachel stared at herself in the mirror, her hair tousled, dark circles beneath her eyes from a restless night. A flicker of something moved in her expression as she remembered Colin asking whether Travis had ever hurt her before last night, his tone carrying the belief that the answer mattered, truly mattered. Ethan had never asked things like that, had never noticed how she flinched when someone touched her shoulder unexpectedly, had never seen her bolt awake from nightmares in the middle of the night. She splashed cold water on her face, the sensation running across her skin as though reviving a part of her that had slept far too long. She could not keep living like this. Not because of Colin, not because of Travis, but because of herself. A woman who once believed she was strong was now dissolving piece by piece, inside the silence of an invisible relationship. She dressed, grabbed her bag, and stepped out the door. No plan, no idea where she would go. But for the first time in many months, her footsteps did not feel heavy, and somewhere inside her, a quiet voice was finally growing louder. "I deserve more than this." Rachel parked in front of the small cafe on the corner of South Congress, the one she used to frequent before everything inside her turned numb. The cafe was not large, but the tall windows and warm golden light spilling onto the cool early autumn morning made it feel like a gentle invitation. She had not thought much while driving there, only that her body needed somewhere other than the apartment walls and Ethan's chilly notes on the mirror. She pushed open the door, the familiar bell chiming overhead. The smell of coffee mingled with waffles and vanilla wrapped around her, loosening something inside her chest. She chose a small table near the window, ordered a cappuccino, and opened her notebook, pretending to have work to do, though she simply sat watching the steady flow of people outside, her mind drifting. She expected nothing, was waiting for nothing, until the door opened again and a voice spoke behind her. "I am guessing you prefer coffee that is not too bitter." Rachel turned around. Colin. He wore a charcoal wool coat and a white shirt beneath it, no tie, but still carried a precision and discipline that felt natural to him. She blinked, taking a few seconds to confirm she was not imagining him. "Colin," she murmured. He smiled slightly and gestured toward the chair across from her. "May I?" She nodded, straightening up, trying to appear calm even as her heartbeat quickened. He ordered an iced black coffee and turned back to her. "Are you all right?" "I am," she replied, and for the first time she felt that the words were not entirely untrue. "I did not think I would see you again so soon. I did not think I would see you here either, but it seems the universe is not so random." Rachel let out a soft laugh, the kind that felt pulled from a place long neglected. She looked at Colin more closely this time. The morning light softened his sharp features, and the gray of his eyes no longer looked as cold as they had in the gym. Warmer now, almost familiar. "I have a morning with no schedule," she explained, as if justifying being alone in a cafe during work hours. "I needed to breathe." Colin nodded. "That is a worthwhile thing to do. Not many people have the courage to stop and breathe when everything is spinning." The silence that followed was comfortable, unforced. Rachel hesitated before asking, "Do you come here often?" "Sometimes, when I want to observe real people." He lifted one corner of his mouth, his eyes carrying a faint veil of thought. "My life is not always full of honesty." Rachel nodded, understanding without needing more words. "I used to come here often, before everything changed." Colin looked at her a moment longer. "It seems like you are trying to reclaim what once belonged to you." She did not answer, only lowered her eyes to the steaming cup in her hands. "I do not know where to start. I do not know if it is too late to find it again." "It is never too late," Colin said, his voice soft as breath but solid as stone. The words settled inside her like an unasked-for promise. When they stepped out of the cafe, the sun was climbing higher, its warm gold spilling over the stone sidewalks. Colin walked beside her, not touching her, not asking anything more. But Rachel felt lighter than she had in months. Perhaps it was only a chance encounter, perhaps it was not. But she knew one thing with certainty. Someone in this world, on an ordinary morning, had seen her, not her role, not her responsibilities, but her, with all her mess and weariness. And that, sometimes, is where the most important changes begin. 2 days later, Rachel received a message from Colin in the late afternoon, just as the last light of the day began turning gold through her office window. "If you are free, take a walk around Lady Bird Lake with me. No pressure, just 2 friends who need a little fresh air." The message made her smile, not because of the invitation itself but because of the way he phrased it. No pressure, just 2 friends. After everything she had endured with Travis, and the growing chill in her relationship with Ethan, what she needed was not someone who would sweep in and change her life overnight, but someone who could walk beside her, quiet enough not to frighten her and patient enough to stay. That evening, Rachel chose a light jacket and a pair of sneakers, tied her hair up, simple and comfortable. When she reached the parking area near the park, Colin was already waiting, his hands in his pockets, a street lamp casting a warm streak of light across his shoulder. "You are right on time," he said, his eyes brighter than usual. "I like to be punctual," she replied, and the 2 of them began walking side by side along the path around the lake. The breeze carried the scent of water and young grass, the soft hum of insects weaving through the sound of their shoes brushing the gravel. At first, they talked about simple things, the weather, the cafe she used to like, the running routes around Austin he knew well. But slowly, the air around them softened, as if a warm coat had been draped over the evening. "I once wanted to be a journalist," Rachel said suddenly, when they paused to look at the water shimmering under the moonlight. "I studied journalism in college. I loved storytelling, loved uncovering truth. But then I chose marketing because it was safe and stable and Ethan thought it was the reasonable choice." Colin did not answer immediately. He looked at the lake for a moment before turning back to her. "Did you ever write anything? A few pieces. for my personal blog, or anonymously for some local papers. But I never had the courage to put my name on anything. He nodded, his voice low and steady. I think you should write again. Even if it is just for yourself. Everyone has a voice of their own. And the moment you stop using it, you begin to fade in your own life. The words made Rachel fall silent for several seconds. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Ethan always advised caution, always asked whether something was practical, whether it could make money. But Colin was different. He did not require her to prove anything. He did not need a plan, only that her heart still held something worth telling. As they continued walking, Rachel spoke again. And you? Before what you do now, what were you? Colin gave a faint smile, but something passed through his eyes, like a thin veil of smoke. I served in the military, special operations in the early years. Then I moved into private security. And then, more complicated things. He stopped there, offering no details, and she did not press. She only asked softly, "Do you ever regret it?" Colin looked toward the lake, where a pair of mallards were gliding side by side across the surface. Yes, but without those things, I would not know how to recognize someone who needs protection. Not with guns or power, but with presence. The answer sent a faint shiver down Rachel's spine, not from fear but from emotion. She could feel the loss in his voice, but also a rare steadiness, the kind a man carries only after walking through deep valleys and still finding a way to stand. When they finished the loop around the lake and returned to the parking lot, Colin paused and looked at her. He did not touch her hand, did not say anything rehearsed or hollow. He simply asked, "If I invite you for another walk next time, would you say yes?" Rachel smiled. "Maybe, but only if you keep your promise that there is no pressure." He tilted his head slightly, a glint of rare mischief in his eyes. Always no pressure. She got into her car and closed the door, but did not drive away immediately. Looking into the rearview mirror and seeing him still standing there, hands in his pockets, his gaze soft and steady on her, she knew that something had begun between them. Not love, not sudden passion, but trust. And in a chaotic world, trust might be the most important first step of all. 3 days after her walk around the lake with Colin, Rachel was brewing coffee in the kitchen when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a hospital in downtown Austin. She answered, her mind going blank for a few short seconds. The voice on the other end spoke quickly but clearly. Ethan had been in a car accident on the highway, brought into the emergency room in stable condition, but with soft tissue injuries and a fractured wrist. He was asking for her. Everything after that unfolded on autopilot. Rachel changed her clothes, shoved her wallet into her bag, locked the door, and drove to the hospital at a speed she did not know she was capable of. She still remembered the way her heart dropped at the word accident. Even though her feelings for Ethan had long grown cold, the thought of him lying alone in an emergency room made her chest tighten. When she arrived, she was taken to a waiting room where Ethan sat on a hospital bed, his right arm in a cast, looking paler than usual. He looked up when he saw her, his eyes slightly glazed from pain medication but still alert enough. "I asked for you," he said, almost awkwardly. "They told me you were on your way. Thank you for coming." Rachel sat in the chair beside the bed and took a slow breath to steady herself. "I am glad you are not seriously hurt." "How did the accident happen?" Ethan explained briefly that he had just left a meeting with partners. The rain was light, the car in front of him braked suddenly, and he had not reacted in time. The collision had not been severe, but enough to make his car spin and hit the guardrail. He had been able to open the door and step out, but his wrist hurt so badly he could not move it. She listened, nodded, and did not comment. It was not the moment for that. The doctor said Ethan could go home that day, but needed someone with him for the first 24 hours to help with basic tasks. Rachel knew what that meant. And although questions swirled in her mind, she also knew she could not turn away. She took him back to the apartment that had once been their home. Ethan lay resting on the sofa while she prepared a light meal, set water and medication on the table. There was no one else in Ethan's life she knew well enough to call. His family lived in another state. His friends were mostly busy colleagues, and Ethan had always kept his world neat and closed. The evening passed in quiet. Not tense like their old arguments, but not comfortable like the past either. Between them was an invisible distance, built from time and silence and all the things they had never said. When Ethan drifted to sleep from the medication, Rachel sat in an armchair nearby, watching the soft glow of the lamp spread across the wall. She thought of Colin, of the way he looked at her as though she were not a woman trapped but someone learning how to free herself. She lifted her phone, almost typed a message, then set it down again. This was not the moment. She did not want the two worlds to bleed into each other. The next morning, Ethan woke and saw her pouring coffee in the kitchen. There was something different in his eyes, something no longer indifferent. He called her name, his voice rough. "Rachel, last night. Thank you. You did not have to stay, but you did. You are the only person who always does that." She turned, holding the mug, but did not step toward him immediately. "I did it because I could not abandon someone who was once the most important person in my life. But Ethan, I do not know how much longer that will be true." He was quiet. No reaction, no argument, only looking at her as if he finally understood she was telling the truth. Rachel stepped closer and set the cup beside the bed. "You will be all right. But I think, when you are better, we need to talk. A real conversation." Ethan did not answer. But in his eyes, there was something that looked like acceptance. Perhaps he had known for a long time, just without the courage to face it, and Rachel had been the same. But after everything, at least today, they sat together not as lovers, but as two people who had once shared a road and were now standing at its final fork. That afternoon, after making sure Ethan could manage with his casted arm and that someone from his company had arrived to handle a few post-accident procedures, Rachel returned to the hospital to submit additional insurance paperwork the doctor had requested. Walking through the familiar stark white hallway, she did not expect to see anyone she knew. But as she reached the reception desk, she heard a low voice behind her, a voice that made her heartbeat stop for a brief, disorienting moment, as if someone had whispered her name inside a dream. "Rachel." She turned. Colin stood there, not in his usual suit but in a light blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his face still severe but his eyes softening the moment they met hers. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice smaller than she intended from the surprise. He lifted an envelope in his other hand. "Someone I know needed documents from the legal department. I did not expect to see you here." Rachel nodded, trying to hide the sudden rush of emotion. "Ethan had an accident. I took him home this morning. Now I am back to pick up paperwork." Colin did not speak right away, but in his eyes she saw a ripple of emotion, assessment, worry, and something that felt like quiet disappointment, even if he did not say it aloud. "Are you all right?" The question sounded simple, but it tightened her throat. She nodded, then shook her head a second later. "I do not know. I did not plan to go back. He has no one else, and I could not turn away when I heard." Colin stepped closer, the space between them narrowing to only a few hand widths. He did not touch her, but his presence alone made the air around her feel denser. He spoke slowly. "I am not blaming you, not judging you. But you need to ask yourself one thing. Are you staying out of compassion or out of fear?" Rachel looked into his gray eyes and saw her reflection there, a smaller, exhausted version of herself who had not yet fully understood her own heart. She did not answer. Colin nodded slightly, as if he understood more from her silence than words could offer. She turned away, clutching the paperwork, but she had only taken a few steps when he called after her. "If you need to walk away, not for me, but for yourself, I am still here. No pressure, no expectations." Rachel stopped in place, something pulling hard inside her. There was a fragility to the moment, the kind where even a small decision could alter the direction of an entire life. She turned back and walked toward him slowly. "I do not know where I am going, Colin. But I know I do not want to go back to where I was." Colin did not smile, but something in his expression softened, like the breeze after a storm. "Then just keep walking. You do not need to know the destination. I will not stand in your way. Just know you are not alone." They stood like that in the cold hospital hallway, with gurneys rolling past, announcements echoing over the speakers, and fluorescent lights flickering faintly above them. No one touched the other, but something was affirmed in the quiet between them. Rachel left after that, her mind still tangled but her heart steadier, clearer. In that moment, she understood something essential. Some people step into our lives not to save us, but to remind us we can save ourselves, and they will stand nearby, waiting, if we ever need a hand, a reminder, or a gaze that sees what we cannot yet name. That evening, Rachel sat alone in the armchair near the living room window, where the city lights cast broken patches of brightness and shadow on the wall. Ethan was asleep, or at least lying still in the bedroom, no longer calling her name or asking anything. The apartment was so quiet she could hear the ticking clock in the kitchen. She had not turned on the lights, letting the faint glow from outside spill through the curtains just enough to see her own reflection on the glass. There was no one to talk to, no words needing to be spoken. It was just her and herself, for the first time in many months. She did not call Colin or send a message, because for the first time, she knew this was something she had to walk through on her own. No one could do it for her. She saw, in the window's reflection, a woman she did not fully recognize. Not the 22-year-old who had chased journalism dreams, not the confident woman who once argued in boardrooms. This was an in-between version of herself, unfinished, uncertain, but finally beginning to be honest. Rachel rose and walked to her desk, where a journal she had abandoned months earlier still lay. She opened it, the last blank page waiting as if it had been expecting her. She took a pen, paused for a few seconds, then began to write. Not an article, not a letter to anyone, but a confession addressed to herself. I am tired. I am lost. I have spent months pretending everything was fine, pretending silence meant safety. But it is a silence that has been killing pieces of me. Ethan is not a bad man, but he is no longer a place I can return to, and I cannot keep being the woman who waits for someone to notice her loneliness. Colin showed me something different. Not rushed love, but a look that reminded me who I used to be. I do not want to depend on anyone to be myself, but I cannot go back to the old version of me either. I want to change. I am afraid, but I want to. She stopped writing and drew a long breath. The air in the room felt heavier, yet also lighter, as if telling the truth had lifted part of the weight she had carried for too long. She closed the journal, walked into the beaded kitchen, poured a glass of water, and looked around the apartment that had once been a home. Every corner held memories, but also endurance. She did not hate the place, but she knew she could not stay forever. Back in the living room, she picked up her phone this time without hesitation. She did not call Colin. Instead, she opened a short-term rental website and began looking for smaller, quieter places where she could begin again, not as Ethan's partner, but simply as Rachel Moore, a woman learning to live honestly with her own feelings and dreams. The next morning, when Ethan stepped out of the bedroom with his arm in a cast, Rachel had already prepared breakfast. She poured him a cup of coffee, set it in front of him as she always had, but this time she sat across from him, her gaze steady. I need to talk. He nodded, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. There was no argument, no defensiveness. She spoke clearly, gently, and truthfully. I will move out within the next week. I need space for myself. I need to find what I left behind. He did not respond right away, only lowered his head, his shoulders sinking as though he had known the truth long before she said it. She felt no regret, no relief, only certainty. And sometimes certainty does not come with pleasant emotion, but it is the necessary step toward returning to oneself. When she walked out of the apartment that morning, the sunlight fell across her hair, and Rachel knew her real journey was only beginning. But this time, she would be the one holding the wheel. 1 week after Rachel moved out of the old apartment, she agreed to meet Colin. Not a chance encounter at a cafe, not a directionless walk around the lake, but a real date. One in which they both understood they were choosing to step into something more than coincidence. Colin arrived at 6 in the evening, his quiet black car stopping in front of Rachel's newly rented apartment. She stepped outside in a soft blue dress that hugged her figure lightly, her hair down and simple, nothing elaborate, but her eyes bright and steady. He opened the car door for her, said little, and only looked at her in a way that made her heartbeat slow for a moment. On the way to the restaurant, they talked about small things. An old bookstore near her neighborhood, the new ramen place, Colin insisted would never outdo the Japanese shop run by an elderly woman near the bus station. She laughed, realizing she laughed more easily now than she had in a long time. The restaurant he chose was not extravagant but warm, with soft golden lighting, wooden tables, and gentle jazz swirling like a soundtrack for comfortable silences. They ordered Italian dishes, red wine, and shared panna cotta for dessert. Their conversation flowed without effort. Rachel told him about the essay she was drafting for a personal blog, an essay about silence inside relationships, and the way it can wear a person down without anyone noticing. Colin listened, without interrupting, sometimes nodding, sometimes simply watching her with a gaze that made her feel stronger, as if her words carried weight. When the dessert arrived, he asked in a voice as light as a passing breeze, "Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life?" Rachel held his eyes for a moment before answering softly. "I lived like that for nearly 5 years, and only recently realized I have the right to step out of it." He smiled, not from amusement but understanding. He raised his glass. "To you, for stepping out, for beginning again." She touched her glass to his, and in that moment something unnamed became clear. After dinner, they did not rush home. Colin drove her through familiar streets that somehow looked new beneath the nightlights. They stopped on a small bridge over a branch of the Colorado River, where the water lay still and the sky was scattered with stars. They stood side by side, their hands not touching, yet every breath and every glance felt like a quiet thread connecting them. "I used to think that after being hurt, feelings would always be cautious and hard to trust again," Rachel murmured, watching the light ripple on the water. Colin answered without haste. "I do not want you to trust me right away. Just know I am here, not to fill a void, but to walk with you if you want me to." She turned to him, her eyes no longer unsure but accepting. She did not reply in words. She simply leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, nothing overly intimate, but enough. That lean was the first release of her defenses, the unspoken yes. And Colin, quietly resting his hand on her back, understood. In that moment, beneath the gentle Austin night and the river breeze, Rachel felt for the first time in years that her heart did not need to strain to keep her upright. It could soften, because beside her stood a man who did not demand strength from her, did not try to fix her, did not rearrange her into someone else. He was simply there, steady as fire kept alive in quiet hands. And so their first date did not end with a kiss, but with the most peaceful silence she had ever known. Rachel did not tell Ethan about Colin. She did not hide it either. She simply saw no reason to share something that had not fully formed, especially with a man she had already walked away from. But Austin was not a vast city, and coincidence was sometimes more ruthless than choice. One Saturday afternoon, when Rachel and Colin stepped out of a downtown cafe, the soft sunlight falling across her hair and laughter still lingering in her eyes from the story she had just told, Ethan appeared from the corner of the opposite street. He froze. The coffee cup in his hand stopped midair. Rachel did not notice immediately, but Colin did. His gaze shifted slowly from her to the man crossing the street, then softened like the surface of a lake before a coming ripple. Rachel followed his eyes, and the world seemed to pause. Ethan stood there in a white dress, shirt and gray slacks, staring at them without blinking. Rachel felt her stomach tighten. She stepped forward, ready to speak, but Ethan's voice cut through, first, controlled, low. "You moved out less than 2 weeks ago, and now you are hand in hand with some stranger." Colin said nothing. Rachel stepped forward again, speaking with as much calm as she could muster. "He is not a stranger. I knew him before you and I ended, and we are over, Ethan." He tightened his grip on the cup until the coffee spilled beneath the lid. "Over. You left without an apology, without once asking how I felt, and now you stand here like you are the victim." Rachel stiffened. "I am not the victim, and you are not the abandoned one. We let our relationship die a long time ago. I was just the first to say it." Ethan looked at Colin again, then back at her. "So this is the real reason. Him." Rachel exhaled, containing the emotions pressing upward. "No, I left because I lost myself. Colin only appeared while I was trying to find my way back. He did not pull me from you. I walked away on my own." Colin remained silent, offering no interruptions. Rachel felt his steadiness beside her like a wall keeping the wind at bay. Ethan looked between them, and now his eyes were not only angry but wounded, confused. "So this is all that remains. You, who promised to walk with me through life, now standing with someone else as if none of it ever happened." Rachel stepped closer, neither afraid nor angry. "I did promise. But you walked too far, too long, and too cold for me to follow. I do not blame you, but I cannot keep living a life I no longer recognize." Ethan turned away, his jaw tight. After a long moment, he said nothing. He tossed the coffee into a nearby trash bin with a soft thud and walked off. Rachel watched him go, her heart not shattered the way she once feared. Just a little sad, honest, sharp, but clean. It was the sadness of someone who had finally lived truthfully, even when that truth hurt another person. Colin stepped beside her, not touching her hand, and asked quietly, "Are you all right?" Rachel nodded, still watching Ethan fade into the crowd. "I am. I hope he finds himself again, the way I am trying to." Colin did not reply, but the look he gave her held everything she needed. And though the encounter still echoed inside her, Rachel knew she had taken another long step away from her past, and this time, on her own feet. The next morning, Rachel woke earlier than usual. The first light of day slipped through the thin curtains, touching the stacks of books she had not yet arranged in her new small apartment. She brewed coffee, sat at the wooden chair by the window, and opened her laptop. No hesitation, no later. She opened old email folders, still tied to joint accounts with Ethan, leases, insurance, bank cards, and one by one, she removed her name from everything that linked her to him. It was more than paperwork. It was a quiet ritual she needed to finally close a chapter. With each click of delete account, remove joint ownership, transfer authorization, she felt as if she were clearing away memories that once kept her tethered not out of love, but out of fear of being alone. That fear was gone now. At noon, she texted Ethan, brief and clear. "I have completed all transfer procedures. The accounts are now separate. I will come by Saturday afternoon to pick up a few personal items. After that, I think we do not need to keep in touch. Thank you for the years we shared." An hour later, Ethan replied with only 4 words. "I understand. Thank you." No anger, no demand for explanation. Perhaps he, too, knew it was time to let go. On Saturday afternoon, Rachel returned to the old apartment for the last time. Ethan was not home. She used her old key, stepped inside, and found everything neat and unchanged, yet she felt as though she were walking into a stranger's house. She collected old photos, a few books with her handwritten notes, her favorite jacket, and the small framed picture from the bedroom. Each item had once held meaning, but none held her now. She placed the key on the dining table and left a note. "I have taken my things. I hope you find peace in your choices. Rachel." When she closed the door behind her, she did not look back. She did not need to. That evening, she walked along the old street back toward her new place, her steps so light even she was surprised. There was an emptiness opening inside her, yes, but it was not cold. It felt like space for something real. On the way home, her phone buzzed. A message from Colin. "No rush, but when you are ready, dinner is on me. For no reason at all, only because I want to hear how it feels to be yourself." Rachel read it 3 times, then smiled. She did not respond immediately. She wanted to hold this moment for herself a little longer, the feeling of no longer being the woman she used to be, no longer pulled by old regrets. She had not only left a relationship, she had returned to herself, and that was worth remembering more than any goodbye. Rachel did not answer Colin's message that night, not because she did not want to, but because she needed time to sit quietly with her own feelings. She spent the entire evening by the window, watching the slow stream of cars slip beneath the soft yellow streetlights. The next morning, when she turned on her phone, she found another message from Colin. He did not repeat his invitation. Instead, he sent her a link to a newspaper article, a local publication looking for contributing writers who focused on social issues and human stories. There was no pressure, no long explanation, only an open door offered with quiet grace. Rachel clicked the link and began reading, her heartbeat slowing as if she had stumbled upon something deeply familiar. She had once dreamed of writing for this very paper when she first graduated, but life's shifting priorities had taken her elsewhere. Now, standing at the beginning of a new crossroads, she felt an old flame flicker back to life. She texted Colin, "I am reading it, and I know why you sent it." "Thank you," he replied within minutes. "You are welcome. I just thought it was time you wrote your own story again, in the most literal sense." In the days that followed, Colin did not appear constantly. He did not call every evening, did not ask what she was doing or eating. Yet whenever Rachel needed something, he always seemed to know. One morning when she stepped outside and found her old scooter refusing to start, she resigned herself to walking to the bus stop, only to notice a small note tucked beneath the windshield. A phone number for a reliable repair shop, with a handwritten line, They owe me one free fix. Just bring your bike in, no worries. Another time, while she was buried beneath books and cold coffee and a looming deadline for her first draft, the doorbell rang. A takeout bag was hanging quietly on the handle, her favorite dish from the place she always ordered, with no sender name written anywhere. But she knew, Colin never needed to knock loudly. His care was the softest of breaths in the background, a steady presence that never intruded but stood as solid as shade on a scorching day. Rachel realized that sometimes what a person needs is not someone who storms in to change their life, but someone who stands beside them while they change it themselves. She did not thank him each time, but each small gesture helped her step a little farther, stand a little firmer, believe a little more. One evening, after finally hitting send on the piece she had written for the paper, she texted Colin, "I just submitted it. I am not sure it is good enough. But I know if it were not for you, I would not have been brave enough to write it." His reply came soon after. "I did not do anything. You took the steps. I only reminded you that the road was still there." Rachel set her phone down and smiled. In a world full of promises and expectations, there was a man who chose to stand quietly behind her so she could move forward not for him, but for herself. And that made everything worth it. The first article Rachel submitted was a small profile piece about the unseen women working behind community projects in East Austin, a story she found after chatting with a group of older volunteers at a park over the weekend. She did not embellish anything, did not chase sensational details. She wrote with sincerity, telling the story as she heard it, as she saw the bright eyes of a woman named Lila, 68 years old, still cooking meals for the homeless 3 times a week. Rachel sent the piece on a soft, rainy afternoon, then closed her laptop without expecting much. But 2 days later, she received an email from the editor. They wanted to publish it, with very few edits. They said her writing carried something that made readers feel the truth. And in a world overflowing with information, that was what they needed. Rachel read that email 3 times, then broke down in tears. Not out of simple joy, but because for the first time in years, she felt a lost part of herself being called back by its true name. The part that believed her voice, however small, could still mean something. She began writing more, first small articles, then short feature series. She spent time in cafes, libraries, parks, listening to everyday conversations, talking with ordinary people, and finding threads of meaning where no one thought to look. Her pieces soon appeared regularly in the Real People, Real Stories section, and readers began to remember the name Rachel Moore as a quiet, thoughtful voice. Colin was always the first to message after each publication. His notes were never empty flattery, but grounded reactions. The story about the lemonade girl made me think of my mother. The one about the gatekeeper made me want to talk to the building security guy next time. Rachel saved every one of them, as if they formed an invisible notebook of the man who always stood behind her. Sometimes, when she finished a piece, she would glance at the chair beside her where Colin often sat reading or working silently, and she would say softly, "I feel more like myself now." He would look up, smile, his eyes warm like kitchen light at night. His support never made her feel dependent. It was a foundation, a quiet trust that gave her courage to push forward. No one urged her to be extraordinary, but for the first time in a long while, Rachel no longer avoided her own gaze in the mirror. She saw a woman doing what she loved, writing with her heart, living by instinct, choosing to move forward even with doubts lingering. One evening, while revising a draft for a small investigative piece on lax management at a temporary shelter, Rachel stopped typing and looked out her window. The city was still alive outside, its lights beating like pulses. She wondered, if that day she had not walked out of the old apartment, had not said enough, would she still be here now? Hands trembling with emotion, as she wrote about things that seemed small, but held entire worlds. The answer was in her breath, slow, deep, alive. She had not yet become a renowned journalist, but she had become someone who dared to pick up the pen again, dared to speak, dared to ask, and sometimes, that is the bravest thing a person can do for themselves. Rachel's first investigative article was published on Monday morning, taking up half the main page of the social issues section. The title was not sensational, simply, "Nights Without Blankets, Inside a Forgotten Shelter at the Heart of Austin." Yet only hours after it went live, the piece began circulating widely across social media. The numbers climbed relentlessly, accompanied by hundreds of reactions from readers' anger, disbelief, and many saying they had never imagined such conditions existed in a modern, thriving city. Rachel sat alone in her small apartment, a cup of coffee in her hand that she had forgotten to drink, her eyes fixed on the screen as though she needed proof it was not a dream. The first phone call was from her editor, his voice more animated than she had ever heard. "Your article was just referenced on the local morning news. The city administration has announced they will inspect the shelter's operations this week. We could expand this into a series if you want." Rachel could hardly believe what she was hearing. It had all begun with a chance conversation with a 12-year-old boy in a park. A boy who told her that each night he and his mother slept, squeezed beside dozens of adults in a common room with no locks, no private beds, and sometimes only one threadbare blanket for 3 people. From that moment, Rachel followed every trail recording the stories of residents, slipping in disguised as someone seeking temporary refuge, taking photos, collecting audio, writing down everything she saw. Meals lacking nutrition, water dripping from the ceiling, volunteers restricted by inadequate budgets, and the strange, uneasy silence of the shelter's management. It took her nearly 3 weeks to gather enough information, verify details, cross-check accounts, and rewrite the draft 8 times before she dared submit it. When she finally hit send, she still doubted whether anyone would care about the people society had quietly chosen to forget. But now she knew, truth carries power when it is told the right way. That evening, while Rachel was sorting through her notebooks, her phone rang. It was Colin. He did not congratulate her the moment she answered. He stayed silent for a few breaths, then asked in his steady, warm voice, "Do you know what you just did?" Rachel laughed, sinking back into the sofa, exhausted but content. I think I finally did something I always believed I could do, but was never sure I would." Colin spoke softly. "You made people look, you made them listen, and maybe you will make them act. I am proud of you." She fell silent for a few seconds, letting his words settle into her bones. "Thank you for believing in me, even when I did not believe in myself." They did not need to say much more. In that quiet space between them, Rachel felt something shift, not only the public reaction to her work, but the way she saw herself. She was no longer the woman who walked away from a broken relationship with empty hands, no longer the girl who thought she had missed her 20-year-old dream. She was living that dream now, with each sentence, each keystroke. And most of all, she was using her own voice to do something meaningful for others. Before she went to sleep, Rachel received a message from Lila, the elderly woman she had interviewed in the park. "Thank you, dear, for helping people like us be heard. We do not feel invisible anymore." Rachel pressed the phone to her chest as tears slipped quietly down her cheeks, not from sorrow, but because for the first time in so many years, she knew she was standing exactly where she was meant to be, in the right place, at the right moment, with her whole heart. And that, sometimes, is how a person begins rewriting their life. Colin was not the kind of man who planned grand dates or followed scripted romantic gestures. He lived quietly, moved with calm restraint, and always left Rachel enough room to breathe, to rediscover herself at her own pace. Yet it was precisely that quality that made the moment he knelt in front of her, on a still late autumn afternoon by the edge of Lake Travis, the most unexpected thing she had ever experienced. They had driven out of Austin together that morning with no real destination in mind, only a short weekend escape from their busy schedules. Colin suggested the lake, the place they had walked together for the first time after their unexpected reunion at the cafe, and Rachel agreed without a second thought. The air was cool, the sunlight gentle, the water flat and shining like a sheet of silver. They brought snacks, a large blanket, and the book Rachel had been reading. She loved these kinds of outings with him, no pressure, no need to articulate everything. Only the comfort of knowing someone sat beside her, close enough to feel safe, far enough to feel free. As the sun began to lower, staining the western sky with red, Colin stood and walked a few steps toward the open patch of ground near the water. Rachel lay on her side on the blanket, her hand propping up her chin, watching his shadow stretch across the grass. Then he turned back to her, and the look in his eyes, the one that always made her feel seen down to the deepest part of herself, held something different this time. Deeper, warmer. He walked toward her, said nothing, and reached into his coat pocket to pull out a small navy blue velvet box. Rachel sat up sharply, her heart pounding as if she had just sprinted. Colin knelt, his hands steady as always, but his voice soft enough that only she could hear it. He told her he did not know whether this was the perfect moment, that he had no long speech prepared, only one certainty he had carried inside him for a long time. From the moment he stepped out of that gym room and saw her standing there terrified, shaken, but still holding herself with quiet resolve, he had known. If there was ever a woman he wanted to walk beside for the rest of his life, it was her. He said he did not want to bind her, did not want to clip her wings. But if he could be the man with whom she built a home, not a place to keep her, but a place to rest and return to, then he wanted to ask for that chance. Rachel could not speak. She looked at him, at the simple ring in the box, not flashy, but exactly the kind she had imagined when she was young, and everything inside her seemed to pause. Not because she did not love him, but because fear still lived there, a quiet fear that if she said yes, she might lose some part of herself again. Colin looked up at her, still on one knee, asking nothing more. He understood. She saw it in his eyes, the patience, the acceptance, and beneath his calm, a small, fragile note of worry. Rachel inhaled deeply as tears gathered, not from pure emotion but from the weight of standing at a crossroads that mattered. She reached out, laid her hand gently over his, and closed the velvet box between them. Her voice trembled, but her words were firm. She needed more time. Not to decide whether she loved him, but to make sure that when she said yes, it would be a promise she would never doubt. Colin nodded. There was no disappointment, no hurt, only a soft smile, tender as the autumn light folding around them. He understood. And he would wait, not because he needed an answer, but because she deserved to choose her future freely. Rachel wrapped her arms around him, and without either of them speaking another word, she felt the truth settle inside her. Sometimes the gentlest patience becomes the strongest vow a person can give to the one they love. 2 days after the afternoon by the lake, Rachel sat alone in the familiar cafe, where she and Colin had met again for the first time after everything. Outside, a faint drizzle tapped against the windows, tiny specks of rain clinging to the glass like tangled thoughts she had not yet named. She had thought endlessly about the look in Colin's eyes as he knelt, about the navy velvet box, about his low, earnest voice that sounded like he was reading a line from the journal of his life. And she thought about the moment she said no, not a refusal that wounded, but one weighted with truth. Not because she did not love him, but because she did not yet love herself enough to step into a new commitment. She remembered the years with Ethan, years in which each day had been a quiet compromise with herself, when she believed holding a relationship together at any cost was what love meant. But now she understood that real love does not require the sacrifice of one's own identity. It must be a place where two people grow, remain free, and walk toward their own light. Rachel pulled a small notebook from her bag, opened to a blank page, and began to write not an article, not a letter, but the words she needed to speak to herself. She wrote that she was on a journey back to herself, and such a journey could not be rushed, could not detour simply because someone reached out at the right moment. No matter how wonderful he might be, if she did not stand firmly on her own feet, she would lose herself again. Her throat tightened at that line. Not from regret, but from recognizing the long distance she had traveled to be able to tell herself the truth. That afternoon, Rachel texted Colin not to meet, not to talk on the phone, but with an honest message. She told him she knew she had left him waiting, and she thanked him for accepting her silence over the past 2 days. Then she told him clearly. She was not ready to marry. Not with him, not with anyone. She needed time for herself. Time to know who she was when she was not someone's partner, when she did not write for approval, when she was no longer trying to please anyone except herself. His reply came not long after. "Thank you for telling me the truth," he wrote. "I am still here, not as someone waiting for a yes, but as someone who respects your journey. If someday you return, and I am still at the starting line, then good. And if not, then I will still have been a man who loved you in the way you deserve to be loved." Rachel held her phone, her eyes stinging. She did not know if they would still belong to each other in the future, but she knew that right now, she was doing the right thing for them both. That night, she booked a solo trip to Northern California, to the dense pine forests and quiet trails leading to small towns where no one knew her name. She would spend the next 3 months living slowly, writing for herself, and listening to herself, truly listening, not running, not delaying, but facing and beginning. Because sometimes, to be ready for real love, a person must first learn how to live fully on their own. The 3 months Rachel spent in Northern California passed like a thin veil of mist, slow, quiet, and sinking gently into every corner of her soul. She lived in a small wooden cabin near the town of Mendocino, where each morning she woke to birdsong and sunlight filtering through a fog-blurred window. She no longer wrote to meet deadlines, no longer checked her inbox every hour, no longer outlined stories for publication. Instead, she wrote in her journal. She wrote about dreams she had long forgotten, about fragments of childhood memories she had never shared with anyone, and about Colin not as an unfinished relationship, but as a presence both deep and steady, like the forest floor beneath her feet every time she climbed the rocky trails. Some evenings, she sat for hours beside a stream, simply watching the water run, listening for the question that had lived inside her for years. Who am I when I am no longer tied to anyone else? And finally, on a morning in early March, when the wind carried the scent of new grass and tiny buds began to open on the branches, she knew the answer had been waiting in her chest all along. She did not need to be perfect to deserve love. She did not need to be ready by someone else's measure. She only needed to be honest with herself, knowing her heart was now wide enough to love someone without losing herself. She returned to Austin on a soft, sunny afternoon, her suitcase light but filled with pages of writing, postcards she had mailed to herself, and a pressed leaf tucked into her notebook, a reminder of the most peaceful moment of her life. The small apartment looked the same, but she was different. Rachel did not call Colin right away. She unpacked, rearranged her shelves, and hung the first photograph she had taken in the forest, a solitary branch rising proud through the morning mist. That night, she sent a message. I am home. No emoji, no question. Minutes later, her screen lit up. I am standing outside your door. Rachel ran, her feet instinctively knowing the way. When she opened it, Colin was still the Colin she had left 3 months earlier, rolled sleeves, a gentle smile, eyes that looked at her as though they had not left her for a single heartbeat. They did not speak at first. They simply stood there, taking each other in. Then Rachel stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, like a piece of music finally reaching the note it had been waiting for. He held her gently, without a single question. It was Rachel who whispered first. I left to know whether I could live without you, and I learned that I could. But I also learned that I no longer want to. Colin did not answer right away. He pulled back just enough to search her face, making sure what she said came from a place deep and true. When he saw it, his eyes softened like a morning lake. So this time, you came back to stay. She nodded. Not to find someone to save me, but to walk forward together. No one behind, no one leading, just side by side, one step at a time. Colin smiled and touched her cheek, his hand light as wind brushing skin after a long winter. I waited, not because I could not live without you, but because I believed you would return, not to me, but to yourself. Rachel smiled through her tears. And for the first time in her life, she felt both chosen and choosing in the same breath, a love without pressure, without conditions, without fear, only a heart finding the place it finally belonged. Rachel sat by the familiar window in her Austin apartment, holding a warm cup of tea as the late afternoon light settled over her tousled brown hair. Outside, the city moved with its usual restless pace, but inside her was a stillness she had never known before. Not the stillness of loneliness, but the stillness of someone who had weathered storms and reached a quiet harbor. She had once believed happiness arrived only when she became enough, when she measured up, when someone else chose her. But her journey had taught her that real happiness begins the moment you choose yourself. She had once been a woman living in the shadow of a past relationship, a woman who had forgotten her own voice, who had mistaken endurance for kindness. And then one small disruption changed everything, from the night Travis locked the gym door, to the way Colin looked at her as he stepped from the dark, to every gentle message that expected nothing in return. Every walk by the lake, every refusal that hurt no one. Each moment was not only part of a love story, but a series of steps leading her back to herself. When Colin first proposed, she was not ready. She had said no, not because she lacked love, but because she did not yet understand her own name. She chose to leave, to live alone, to write alone, and in the silence of the forest she relearned how to listen to herself. And when she returned, she expected nothing, did not assume he would still be waiting. But Colin was still there, no resentment, no disappointment, simply present, as though he had always known she would come back. Not back to him, but back to the heart that had finally healed. Real love is not a refuge from pain, nor is it salvation. It is companionship. It is when two people truly see one another with all their scars, doubts, and unfinished pieces. And when Rachel whispered to Colin that she had been seen, it was more than a confession of love. It was a declaration of life, the final truth of a journey that taught her the greatest gift is not to be loved, but to be understood and allowed to exist fully as herself. Rachel's story is not only a love story between two people, but a story of healing, of reclaiming the right to say no, of the strength it takes to walk away in order to find the voice inside. And above all, it is a reminder that each of us deserves to be seen, heard, and loved without condition. If this story has touched something inside you, if you have ever felt lost in your own relationship, ever stayed silent when you should have spoken, ever stepped back because you feared you were not enough, then perhaps you are standing at the very place where a new beginning can start. Thank you for listening this far. If this story offered something worth reflecting on, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who may need to hear it. What are you feeling in your heart right now? What part of Rachel's journey reminds you of your own life? Leave a comment below and share your truth with us. Every story is a bridge, and we are always here to listen to yours. We will see you in the next video with more heartfelt and meaningful stories. Wishing you good health, a peaceful life, and a reason to smile each day. Goodbye, and until next time.